access to the technology has become cheaper and cheaper, and so companies like 23andMe, ancestry.com, and leapt into this quantified self era and basically said, okay, spit in the test tube, mail it to us, and then we can give you a whole host of results related to your genetic test.
Like, we're constantly, as a culture or as a species, seeking new tools to tell us who we are. And this, in some ways, is the latest version of a very old story. There's actually tons of room for interpretation in these genetic ancestry tests.
That is one of the challenges, even with these kinds of genealogical ancestry pursuits, that at times part of what it demands of us is having to really reconcile, because we don't know what's going to emerge.
My name is Kelsey Castañon. I grew up in Kansas. My dad was born in Cuba, and so he brought a lot of that with him. One thing I remember growing up is we would go to my abuela and my abuelo's apartment. You know, I would speak English to them and they would speak Spanish back. Cuban people, there's this air, you know, of just confidence, and I sort of really took that in and fused it into everything that I did. I was just very proud of it. So I was home for the holidays in Kansas, and my sister was also home. She lives in California. So we were standing in the kitchen, and they sort of looked at each other, my mom and my dad, and they were like, let's go talk in the living room. All of these horrible thoughts were going through my mind. She said, Amanda took a DNA test, and it came up that she had no Cuban in her, nothing was from the Caribbean or from Latin America. There's something that we've been meaning to tell you. And my dad looked at me and says, I am not your biological father. I would have never thought in a million years that that would have been the news.
Only in the last 400 or 500 years that people have really seen race as the fundamental essence of identity. In earlier eras, we might have thought of religion, ethnicity, region, kingdom as what really makes you who you are.
It was sinking in that I didn't know what this meant for me or how I felt about it. Who am I? What am I? If I'm not Cuban, what am I?
We're always living and operating really in a world that's like moving and changing, and that's really kind of unstable. And our attempts to try to like root ourselves in a set identity is an attempt in some ways to try to construct stability.
African Americans, Latinos typically assume themselves to be mixed already. So when they find out evidence of mixture, they're like, oh, okay, no big deal. When white Americans find out anomalous information, it's the ones who see whiteness as boring that really grab onto a piece of evidence that they're something different.
There are a variety of folks, white populations, but as well as non-white populations who approach this kind of process of DNA testing with a sense of like, let me figure out these different kinds of elements that made me, like it's a recipe that have made me who I am, as opposed to like the histories, the conditions, the context.
The main thing I was looking for when I got those papers was, what am I? I was excited to know that I still had Hispanic in me, so it came back and it was Mexican, Spanish, and Italian, I think. But I was relieved to know at least I had that because, I was part of Hispanic community groups and I wrote stories about being Hispanic and being proud of that.
They take your DNA sample and they reference it against known sequencing patterns. So from an ancestry perspective, they know specific genetic makeups of individuals from those areas, and then they can match your genetic makeup to those areas and with certainty, or sometimes not, tell you if you're from that region or not.
I was curious as all hell to know what I was. And then I got the results. I got an email and it said, your lab sample could not be processed. But try again, here's a replacement kit. I was toying with the idea that maybe you don't really even want to know, but I still ordered another test.
The meaning of the genetic ancestry tests is open. On the one hand, they seem to tell us we're connected with people, we're not as pure as we think. But on the other hand, it tells us that identity is in our genes and that we can find enough traces of race in those genes to prove that that race is a really real biological thing.
So I sent it in, my second kit, and it came back with the same result, that they could not get my DNA. And so I took it as a sign that I just was not meant to know things beyond what I already know, which is that I am Cuban, and that's not going to change.
We need to cultivate the language and terms for who we are, and also recognize when the language and terms that we've been given by our parents, by our elders, by our communities, when they are not adequate, then we got to find other means of expressing that. And that's really the phenomenal thing about, you know, the arts, creativity, music.
The double-edged sword of these DNA tests. You go in thinking that you're going to find out the basic, you know, your background, what exactly makes up who you are. But I think it's a small part that plays into a bigger picture of who you are.
I think the marketing, especially for Ancestry, is too black and white. But they won't ever tell you who you are, and I think when they're starting to create perceptions of, okay, now you finally have answers, I think it's unfair.
They say, find out something about yourself, connect to people around the world, but they're still telling you because genetics is the way that you need to think about your identity.
I mean, identity can mean so many things. It can pertain to your gender, it can be your background, it can be so many different things, and I think people are challenging themselves to figure out what that means. And more people want to know, I think, than they used to. I'm Kelsey Castañon, and I am Cuban.